I'm reprising my role as the panel moderator from last time here. This is generally, yeah, I sat on a panel here once about 3 or so OpenStack Israels ago, and then I told Nati afterward, you know, Nati, I really don't feel very qualified to talk on these panels. So Nati said, okay, fine, you'll moderate the next one. So this should tell you what to think of panel moderators, really. Okay, so we're going to, and this, by the way, if you just scan this QR code really quickly, that takes you to the tweet for like actually submitting questions, which would be great if we could get more of. Okay, so the title that we selected for this panel is The Joy and Pain of OpenStack. So we're going to talk about in which ways OpenStack actually adds value to companies, specifically the companies of our panelists here, and the pain that they have felt in deploying OpenStack, which I'm sure has happened occasionally.
No pain.
Right?
Absolutely no pain.
No, that's just because you like pain, and for you, pain is joy. But that's a different story. I hope I didn't spill the beans on you here. Okay, so before we get started with the actual questions, please take a moment to help me welcome our panelists. I'm going to do this in alphabetical order. We have Axel from Deutsche Telekom, who already spoke this morning. We have Boris from Mirantis, who joined Nati in the fireside chat. Also this morning. Danny, unfortunately, can't be here. We have Srinivas from TD Bank, who also gave a keynote this morning. And then finally, of course, we have, as I call him, the voice of insanity in OpenStack, Monty Taylor from HP. And I have a few sort of pre-compiled questions here, but only a few. It's not going to fill the whole 30 minutes, so I need your help, and I'm going to get to the Twitter questions in just a moment. So the first question that I'd like to ask is one that sounds deceptively simple, but interestingly, you typically get very, very different answers depending on what kind of person you talk about and what kind of company they work for. And that simple question is, what does OpenStack mean to your company? What is OpenStack specifically for you? Is it a tool? Is it a strategic investment? Is it something that you base your company on? Tell us a little bit about what OpenStack means to your company. Axel, would you like to start?
Yeah. We have a mic?
We
so
actually have
on one side, it's a tool. It's a strategic tool, I would say. And it gives us control on one side on our own fate and independence of just one vendor. So if you build critical infrastructure where all your business is based upon, you don't want single vendor dependency. And that's what OpenStack gives us.
Okay. Srinivas, do you want to take that?
Sure. I think it's, I would agree that it's strategic, but it's at the same time very foundational. So to us, it represents the basis by which we can have a dynamic strategy in our cloud architecture, right? But I would call it a foundational tool, but it's nevertheless a tool that has to be very resilient. And that's one of the key aspects of OpenStack that we're interested in improving upon in our organization.
Right. I believe Boris has a very short answer to this one.
Well, what we do is we sell OpenStack services and distribution. So for us, it's what we do. But in the grand scheme of things, I think we see OpenStack as an infrastructure fabric that helps various organizations, enterprises and telcos alike, absorb and take advantage of infrastructure innovation faster and more efficiently.
So this is where I get to talk for HP. That's scary for them. So I think for us it's both the present and the future. It is everything for the IT industry overall, and it must work, right? There is no alternative. There is no second strategy. OpenStack is where everything must go, because the other option is that all of our data is owned by public companies in the US under the control of the NSA. So I think that it is absolutely required that people continue to have the freedom to own their own IT infrastructure and to keep their data in the country and locality of their choosing.
Who of you would agree with the statement, OpenStack is an all-in bet for my company?
Well, I put my money where my mouth is, so.
Is that true for you as well? Would you say so? So basically, you would take it so far as to say, if OpenStack were to fail at any point, which we all know it won't, but if it were to fail, then that would actually be an existential threat to my company? I mean, it's relatively obvious for these two guys. It's certainly obvious for my company, but
It's not obvious for HP, I don't think.
I think it is. I think it's the cloud is where people are moving. It is how the industry is changing how it thinks about things, and so I think that it is an existential threat for any of us that are in this space. If we want to continue to be in this space, it is the way to remain a part of the industry. So I think it's as existential for us as well. I mean, we also have
And no,
machine,
I didn't mean this in a negative fashion in any way. I think that
Sure.
at this point, there's us, there's Red Hat, there's HP, there's a number of other companies. But if HP or Red Hat were to kind of phase out of OpenStack, that would be devastating for us as an independent player too. Because now I think there's just the right number of OpenStack distro players on the market for us as an independent pure play to really kind of be viable. If HP and Red Hat go away, then it just becomes a Mirantis thing, and then it just dies.
So with that established, with basically everyone saying, okay, our company has a vested interest in OpenStack, and nobody, basically this whole industry really can't afford OpenStack to fail. In your own opinion, or based on what actually affected you the most in your personal experience with OpenStack, what's the most broken thing in OpenStack right now? And that could be anything. It could be a piece of technology. It could be something related to governance, whichever. What is it about this whole conglomerate of OpenStack that for you is currently the most broken and that creates, and as a result, creates pain?
I think for me and this I'm sorry, this is going to get mildly geeky, but I think our abstractions are leaky at the moment, and I think that deployer choices are winding up exposing themselves through to the other side of the API. You have to, as a consumer right now, know too much about how your deployer decided to deploy their OpenStack, and I think that is from a consumption ecosystem perspective, that's very problematic, and we need to tighten those things up, because I think it's good that we have the different deployment options and that people can make those sort of differentiating choices for themselves. But as soon as that starts affecting how the APIs work, then we're losing out on this being a collaboration between all of us, and it starts to very quickly go south. And so I think that as we can start to, and we're working this from several different angles, the foundation, DevCore, TC, everybody, we're working on it. But like as we find these things, we've got to tighten them up so that those become operator choices that are advantageous to make, but not leaky. So that's my biggest thing. It's not an easy one to deal with.
So Monty talks about the consumer perspective, and I think by your definition, Axel's company and Srinivas's company are definitely fall in that consumer scope. So what is it for you that's actually painful? There's one more mic down there.
Okay.
There you go.
Actually, I mentioned it this morning. So I think there are two areas actually which are causing quite some pain. And I got some tweets as a feedback on the presentation I made this morning as well, that some of the big players are still on older releases of OpenStack. So the lifecycle management with the frequency of new releases with features we actually desperately want coming out, the lifecycle management of OpenStack is definitely something which is challenging. The other part is definitely, as we also saw in the Red Hat presentation today, high availability. So.
Yeah, I think back in 2003, there was a Harvard professor who wrote an article called "IT Doesn't Matter," and the point of his article was that IT is too operator intensive, and it must reach a point where it must not be operator intensive. And the thing about OpenStack is that it's at a point where it matters too much, in my opinion, right? It needs to get to a point where you must be able to count on the basics of it. I can't quite say that it's broken as yet. I think there are issues that you can work around today, but there are concerns around capacity management, concerns around being able to manage quality of service, concerns around availability management. For those in a business layer, they just expect these things to just be taken care of.
Right. I should perhaps clarify one thing. I did mean the term broken in sort of the developer sense, as in, here's a problem, we need to fix it, as opposed to the more general sense of it's unfixable. I wasn't insinuating anything that's unfixable. I'm just interested in the things where you're saying, okay, this actually needs fixing, just to clarify that. Boris, what's your take?
Well, I have a couple of sides to this, and I don't know how much of a developer take I can, there's problems around the place, there's high availability is a problem, networking to some extent is a problem, Keystone is a problem, etc. But those are small problems that kind of constantly getting better. I think from kind of a systematic standpoint, there's two issues. One, I think, is kind of more general. Another one is more personal to us. So the general one, and I talked about it before, and I think that relates a little bit to what Axel was talking about, is around the kind of release management, but not even so much release management, but the notion that OpenStack adopters today have an obsession with being close to trunk. And we actually used this to our advantage in the early days by kind of marketing ourselves as, we're the services company. We'll let you be at the tip of a trunk, or, we're very close to trunk distribution. But over time, as we started getting into the enterprise space, we realized that to actually get things to work well, you need to spend a lot of time to do downstream hardening and fixing. And at the same time, every time the new release comes out, it's like this big bang, and everybody wants this new release. And you are still stuck fixing the release before it, and that's kind of generally a problem. This is the generic thing. The other problem that completely non-developer related but kind of personal to us is the stuff that's happening around the OS certification. So we don't have our own OS. We work with different OS vendors. We focus on OpenStack only. But to us specifically, the notion of Red Hat not working with anybody who has a distribution that's not OpenStack distribution, that's not their distribution, is a problem. And I think that it's a kind of a nuanced issue for us as a company, but I think it's also kind of a bigger problem for the community in general, because it's symbolic of how larger organizations can leverage their muscle to stifle open innovation. So
I'd actually like to agree with a portion of that. I think there's a way in which that second one is sort of similar to, on the technical side, similar to the leaky abstraction problem. As a consumer of a cloud, I shouldn't know what operating system is running underneath on the control plane. But if there's things in the market that are causing there to need to be a particular operating system play underlying something, then that's all of a sudden puts a lot of things in a very weird place, where again I sort of have to know something about a thing that should be a detail that I'm actually it should be hidden from me. That's sort of one of the nice things about the cloud piece. So yeah, I think we have to get that taken care of.
Yeah, and I think it's indeed politics hitting open source.
Okay.
And for what I mentioned, both lifecycle management as well as high availability, per distribution, you actually have some solutions for that. But then you have a dependency on this distribution.
Yeah.
And I see that the community doesn't adopt either approach proposed by company X, Y, Z, and that's a pain for us as consumers of the technology.
Right. Okay, so now that all of my panelists have basically identified a pain point that they perceive as being sort of broken in OpenStack, You know, after all, this is a community. This is an open source community, and it is the first DevOps open source community of its magnitude. So for the things that you individually just mentioned, I'd like to ask you, what is it that you specifically are doing to fix it? What is it that your individual company contributes to the fix of what's most painful to you?
Next question.
No? I'm not going to let him dodge this one.
I think that the problems that I've outlined, the only things that well, the first one, what we've done is we just said kind of, you know, to hell with being at the tip of the trunk. The key for us is to actually deliver a product that works. And you know, I talk at conferences like that, and I write blogs about how, you know, being at the tip of a trunk is maybe not the nirvana, and that's the only thing you can really do, in my opinion. And as far as the Red Hat part, you know, the route that we've taken, we said, you know, like, we don't care. We will go ahead and we'll do packaging for Mirantis OpenStack on top of RHEL, and then oftentimes we have, you know, situations where we come to the customer, and the customer chooses us, but they're a RHEL shop. And then we come in and we run Mirantis OpenStack on RHEL, and it works. And then our experience has been that, you know, Red Hat hasn't come and said that, okay, we're not going to support you. And in some situations where insinuations of that were there, you know, when there's a big financial services customer that is, you know, millions of dollars of revenue to Red Hat, they come back to them and say, well, you know, I'm paying you millions of dollars, I don't care, support me anyway, and the kind of issue goes away. And by continuing to do that, I mean, we hope to eventually solve that problem.
Okay, so Boris, I appreciate your candor, and knowing that the audience is almost 100% Israeli, they will too. But I'd like to sort of keep it a little down on the side of referring to companies that are not here on the stage, unless we actually have someone who wants to join us here, which would be cool. But just let's keep it civil.
I thought I was being civil, but okay.
That's all right. Yeah, no, that's fine. Axel, what is Deutsche
so
Telekom doing about lifecycle management and HA?
Actually, we are bringing in our use cases and our people into the telco working group, and I think that's a good way of influencing the community. We're bringing in some development resources as well, but I think the problem with the operators is that many operators don't understand the open source model. So operators come into an open source community and say, oh, I'm the big operator, here are my requirements, please deliver. And this doesn't work. So we try to change this mindset also among fellow operators.
Okay.
Well, I think there are just some simple things that we are doing today to improve availability, right? So there are some good practices that are prevalent in OpenStack: implementation of availability zones, placement of VMs across availability zones, ensuring that we boot from volume. There are some simple best practices, and ensuring that our application architectures, they don't exactly have to be cloud enabled. They just have to be good application architecture, you know? They just have to adopt common sense practices, you know, having a watchdog, failing gracefully, trying to be stateless as much as possible. So implementing some controls to look at the applications, advise them early of anti-patterns in the architecture, implementing some basic tests before they go live. And then, of course, we are very keenly interested in the improvement of some of the HA capability, runtime HA capability, not so much provisioning, that doesn't concern us much, but runtime capability in the hypervisors. I think if that improves, I think we'll get to a really good place. And with what Rackspace and Red Hat are doing, it actually is very encouraging to see as well. So I think it's just about managing the risk properly, which we're trying to do right now.
Right. And Monty, since you got involved in OpenStack, have you done anything other than relieving your own pain?
No.
See, there you go.
So on the lifecycle management, I have a person working on the I have an employee working on the upstream Puppet modules, a person working on the upstream Ansible, 2 people working on the upstream Ansible modules. I don't have anybody working on HA. I have somebody working on stable branches for Boris, and also I have people now working on upstream distro packaging in the upstream community. And on my own side, I've recently written a couple of different libraries that hide the vendor differences that leak out past the abstractions that you can use to do that. So hopefully, I'm sorry I don't have anybody working on high availability at the moment, but I'll put that on my list.
Okay, I wish to add something else, right? I think the aspect of cloud that really compensates for the designed shortcomings, if you will, is really the auto-scaling and auto-healing capabilities. In fact, I'm here to meet with the Gigaspaces team, looking at their capabilities to manage, so that there is a reason why things are the way they are. It's commodity hardware. You're not trying to spend too much money to try and make it super strong. You're trying to rely on the other capabilities of cloud to compensate. So auto-scaling and auto-healing are very critical short-term capabilities that we need to have to manage this issue.
We have an interesting question on Twitter, which is, will OpenStack become operator-friendly, and what needs to change for that to happen? Axel, your company is undoubtedly a very large-scale OpenStack operator. Maybe we'll rephrase the question a little bit. What would make OpenStack more operator-friendly? What would make it easier for you to deploy and maintain and upgrade and manage OpenStack in your environment?
Well, I think it's actually not too bad. We are running it now in production, so.
But you have all the German engineering behind you and whatnot.
Ooh. No, actually, I have Croatian engineering, German engineering, and so it's a pretty international team. Actually, I was smiling this morning, I believe it was in the HP presentation. It's a company on stage, so I can make that comment. Someone mentioned that carrier grade. So, and that is indeed something you see quite often raised in the community. I remember a conference in Barcelona 2013. People were arguing, oh, OpenStack is not carrier grade, we cannot run it. Bullshit. Carrier grade of the past were these platinum covered racks, which were very expensive. So we can run it in the operator community. It's not the OpenStack which needs to change, it's the operator which needs to adjust.
It's so nice to hear an operator say those words, because if I say them, they come across as very, very hostile. So thank you.
We have another question about a different group of companies. And I wonder if your answer is the same, which is, how do we make OpenStack more attractive to startups? Is it also, oh well, startups need to change or need to think differently, or what's your take on that?
I think that there's one answer for both of those questions. Mm-hmm. And first of all, I would agree that it's probably not very bad for operators, given that operators are prepared to deal with the complexity of OpenStack. And I think that what makes it hard today, so OpenStack is all about flexibility and configurability, and with that naturally comes complexity. And whether or not it's hard for you, it depends on what your adoption patterns are. If you come to OpenStack and you embrace this configurability and flexibility, the expectation of you is that you will have good kind of operator capability in-house to tackle that, because chances are you will be running a configuration of OpenStack that probably only you are running, or maybe a few others. Now, for it to become operator-friendly, you have to really make it extremely opinionated and simple. And to make it good for a startup, you just have to package it in a box or an appliance or something like that, so you can just get it and push a button and everything works. So ultimately, whether or not it's hard or easy for startup operator depends on whether or not you want to embrace the flexibility and configurability, or you want to go with something that's super kind of prepackaged and opinionated.
Yeah, I think one of the other places that, in thinking about startups using clouds, because like most startups are thinking, like it's very rare nowadays when a startup decides they're going to go out and buy a rack of gear. Like that's a depending on who they are, yeah. Maybe if they're a cloud startup, they might start with a rack of gear. And so one of the things to make that cost effective for them, honestly, needs to be more market saturation of people running public clouds. Like we're doing really well so far in private clouds and in managed private clouds, and we actually have probably more public clouds deployed than people may realize, because we're doing a really good job of having region-specific public clouds, which is actually really cool. Actual local companies spinning up clouds in Germany and in Mexico and in Canada and China and things like that. And that's a really awesome thing to see. But we need more of that before the price point on that is going to be at the point where a startup company is going to find it as achievable as some of the other options. So I'm hoping to see more people dive into that.
Right.
I may want to actually put this near my mouth rather than down here.
No, that's all right.
Sorry.
Okay, and then I have a final question because we're almost out of time. OpenStack is now almost 5 years old, right? So that means it has achieved a certain degree of maturity, but we don't really see that from the age of 5 years. We see it because now there's actual serious people that say the words Gartner and OpenStack in one sentence, right? Which is something that we thought impossible 5 years ago, right? So, wait. Everyone knows this, right?
Lifecycle.
Yeah, the Gartner hype cycle, right? I'd like to poll your opinions on where we are.
Oh boy.
We're all over that would be unusual. Axel, what do you think? Like you've
I think it depends on the components you're looking at.
Okay.
There are some, take heat, which are maybe at an earlier stage, or some of the other modules, which take Manila or anything very early still, and then some which are definitely reaching the plateau already. So it depends. For an end-to-end, it's probably a little bit everywhere in the middle, but I think for the components we mostly depend on, we're reaching the plateau.
I think that we're just exiting the trough of disillusionment. That's what I'm thinking.
Okay.
Oh, there.
I'm not going to directly answer your question.
Are you running for office?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm always running for office. I've got 2 different OpenStack offices I got to be
That's right,
elected for. I think the thing that I noticed in the last couple of OpenStack summits has been the run around crazy, freak out vibe has been lower, right? And it's actually been more and more people getting together in rooms and working on their real workloads, their real problems, and doing that. And so to a certain degree, I know one of our former board members made a comment after the last cycle or last summit about maybe the magic being gone or something like that. And I actually think that's a good thing, right? Because we're there doing work, and it's not just the people coming for the party. And so I'm not sure exactly what that means in terms of the magical trough cycle, but I think we're definitely past the point where it's just all drinking, and more to the point where people are legitimately running their businesses on this stuff. And so when they're getting together to work on actual real world production issues that they've got, and doing so with seriousness and care, which is really great to see.
Srinivas, I see you nodding vigorously. So are you concurring with Monty?
I don't think the curve
Monty,
actually applies to something like OpenStack, in my opinion. The curve doesn't apply because it isn't something that you can step into that easily, especially if you have incumbent commitments in the organization. So most places that are truly serious at a large scale are not in a position to say, let's do it. It's not something you do overnight, right? So therefore, I think people have been waiting to see what's going to happen, right? It's been thought of as a second cloud solution by many enterprises. Now people are saying maybe it's the first one, right? So I don't think the actual curve actually applies.
Okay.
But I certainly hope so, and I think I'm beginning to agree that maybe 6 months ago I would have had a different answer. In my last job, we actually decided not to go with OpenStack because we were unsure and we didn't think we were good enough to actually run it. In this job, the organization thinks it's good enough, right? So I think the trend is moving, and the improvements are beginning to unfold in the areas that concern scale, and stability, which are the principal concerns of the enterprise.
Right. All right. Yeah.
It went dark.
Yeah, I know, it went dark. Nati and Jeremy think I'm German. I'm not, I'm Austrian, but they still hire me as a timekeeper here. And we're 1 minute over time here, so would you please join me in thanking our panelists?